Just so everybody knows, I'm going to be switching devices again in a few minutes once I get this other computer up and running.
Okay.
Okay, we're ready, Laura, whenever you are.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Can we please stand for the pledge? America to the Republic
for which stands one nation,
under God,
indivisible,
liberty, justice for all.
For a moment of silence. Okay, thank you. It over to Deputy Superintendent John O'Keefe for an update.
All right, just basically and quickly, tonight is actually two meetings rolled into one. By law, as we approach the budget vote, we're required to have a budget hearing. So actually we'll start the meeting this evening with a budget hearing and a very brief presentation. We'll do it the same style that I did in the last meeting, where I'll share my screen with you. I'll go through a few slides and then we'll pause to see if the board has any questions. Allison did have a period of time out for the community if they had any specific questions related to the budget, and I don't believe there were any, Allison. They're related to specifically the hearing or the budget, so I don't think there'll be anything at that part of it. The other piece, we just want to let the community know, Ms. Hines' office will be releasing a memo tomorrow. Obviously, we've been in this, we're in our third month now. It's over 2.5 months that we've been in the sort of lockdown situation, and every day is something new. The governor 33 executive orders, so every day the rules slightly change. So we've sort of slowed down with the amount of information coming out because, quite frankly, and unfortunately, just as we start to formulate a plan, we find out that the governor has tweaked things a little bit, and we need to modify what we're going out with. So, obviously, people are very anxious about end-of-year events, graduations, things of that nature. We're still waiting for guidance from the governor. I mean, the New Jersey governor you saw yesterday released a clear statement that said, starting July 6th, the schools could begin to have live graduations. We know a lot of the community. We've gotten a lot of feedback through our survey. The community is very desirous of maintaining some form of live graduation, although we know it would be very different than normal. So that's our Plan A model. I'm hearing actually late this afternoon that the state senators are going to the governor and they're sort of requesting the same thing that New Jersey has, where he allows it in July. So, we'll roll out Plan A. We'll let the community know what it is, which would be a live event. Unfortunately, we may have to change that. So please be patient with us. It's not like we're trying to withhold information. It's just a matter of we're trying to give you information that's accurate without having to develop plans, recant what we're doing, and start all over again. So thank you very much. Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. O'Keefe. Can I please have a motion for approval of the minutes? Alex, second. Larry, any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. Now we'll move on to the public hearing section. Opening of the public hearing and discussion. May I please have a motion?
Motion.
Sarah, second. Dorothy. Mr. O'Keefe.
All right, let's just hope the technology works, and we're going to try that screen share again. All righty, so hopefully everyone can see that. We've got the presentation slide. So I'll do like I did last time. It's just a brief presentation of 9 slides. I'll go through it. It's just basically reiterating some of the information we covered last week, but some of it's in a slightly different format as required by law for a budget hearing. So just the fast facts on the budget. Next year's budget is proposed at $33,362,000. That's a $6.1 million increase over the current year's budget. That's a 1.87% budget to budget increase. So next year's budget is growing by 1.87% more than this year's budget, so less than 2%. If we look back since the inception of the tax cap, which is 9 years now, our budget to budget average is about 1.65%. So very much in line with the 9-year average. Now the levy, this is the part that gets confusing for the public. why do we always show two numbers? Why are there always two percentages? The budget is what you go to the poll to vote for. So you're approving that budget of $333 million. The levy is one portion of the revenue stream. So in Sachem, 60% of the revenue necessary to run the school district comes from the taxpayer and 40% from the state. And that varies district to district. There's not necessarily any real rhyme or reason to it. That's why you're always hearing districts talking about equity and things of that nature. Some districts rely almost entirely on state aid. Some receive almost no state aid. So part of our budget is also disclosing to you what the tax levy increase, because that's the portion that impacts the taxpayer. So next year's increase is 2.49%, and that is within the calculation of the 2% tax cap, which I know is confusing. It's not just simply adding 2 to the number. There are different components, and if you look back to the last presentation, I actually give you a little breakdown that shows you where those numbers come from. So it's within the cap, and it only requires a simple majority vote. And if we do that same analysis and we look back over the 9 years since the inception of the tax cap, our average year-to-year increase is about 2.88%. So as you can see, it's never exactly 2. Some districts are right around 2. Some are much more than 2. We're always in that 2.5 to 3 range. So again, very much in line with what's been normal. Busy slide, lots of information. This is something that's required by law, but only in a condensed version. So during a budget hearing and as part of the disclosures to the community, you have to present the budget in the 3 components: the administrative component, the program component, and the capital component. And we technically actually only have to give those 3 individual numbers. But I find that very confusing and misleading to the public. They don't know what's behind those numbers. They just see 3 titles. Obviously, they can go to the line-by-line budget and go through it. But when we say, what are the different parts, this helps, illustrate what those different components mean. So if you look across the top, that's the administrative component. Basically, everything unrelated to the education of the child. It's the running of the school district. It's the central administration. It's the Board of Education, the district clerk's office, payroll, benefits, personnel, security office, our district-wide insurance, BOCES. It's all of the administrators on the curriculum side, principals, assistant principals, directors, and their benefits as part of the package. And that's the growth that you see across that top. Year to year, the growth in this particular area of the budget's about 1.75%. The biggest portion of the budget, of course, is the program. That's all the curriculum instruction, both the general ed and the special education side. You take a look at that number, the growth there is about 2.5%. And the last piece is the capital piece. That's our building and grounds. That's our district debt on our bond debt. That's the purchase of any new school buses if we're doing that in a given year. And it's also any capital projects that we have in a given year. And if you notice down at the bottom of the slide, that particular category is actually shrinking a little bit because we do have a rather sizable drop in debt. Some of our bonds are paid off now. So we've plateaued down to that $15.8 million level. And that stays rather steady for a couple of years. And then a few more years, it'll drop off. I believe we have about a dozen years or so left on that major bond debt from back from the building of Sequoia and East. On the other side, you have the revenue budget. The expenditure budget, revenue budget must balance. The expenditure budget is your spending plan. The revenue budget is how you plan to pay for it. So the 3 major categories are up on top. You have state aid, you have our property tax levy, and then you have payments in lieu of taxes, which you may know as pilots. And then we have some other miscellaneous revenues. So up on top, you'll see state aid looks like a rather dramatic drop. If you look back to the April 1st numbers, and we discussed this last time, we did receive a reduction of about $750,000 from last year's number to this year's number. We've reduced that even a little bit more because we know that we haven't had bus transportation since March. So we have 3 months in which we have not paid for transportation. Transportation is an expense that drives in a particular category of aid. If you don't have an expense, they're not going to aid us. So based on the calculation of what we haven't spent, we're making an assumption that next year's aid will be that $125.2 million number you're seeing there. The tax levy is the 195.6 we spoke about, a slight decrease in pilots, and then we have some other revenue sources. The one thing I'd want to just point out, though, is this is a year where we are going to be using some of our fund balance and reserves to balance the budget. And primarily it's backfilling that loss of aid for the transportation, as well as some increased transportation costs, as well as the increase in the teachers' retirement system employer contribution. That's rising by nearly $1 million. So we're taking that money from that reserve to fund that increase, which is what the reserves are there for. Down on the bottom, there's just a little caveat that talks about why that 125 number is what it is, and also the reminder to the board and the community that the governor can come back quarterly and adjust our aid number if there's been a reduction in actual revenues received from the state. So that's a little disconcerting. Property taxes, again, something that every community member is always very concerned about. Nobody likes property taxes, and nobody likes that they increase each year. I wish I could simply say if the budget passes with the 2.49% levy increase, that your taxes will only change by that amount. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily the case. It's further complicated, and I won't go into a lot of detail, but many of you may know, Sachem is obviously in 3 different towns. We're in Brookhaven, Islip, and Smithtown. So the voters go to the polls, they approve the budget. In the budget is the levy. Well, how much do I send the bill to each town? How do I know how much that amount is? That's not something the district decides. That's actually something that the state decides. And they don't decide the apportionment until the fall. So my estimation here is based on the numbers for the current year. These could actually change or shift a little bit. So in the fall, we'll get equalization rates. And from those rates, we'll actually apportion the levy. So if you look at the very far right column, it says tax levy distribution, Brookhaven 64.67%, Islip 31.55%, and then Smithtown. Those might actually shift a little. If you look back to last year's, they'll be slightly different. And again, it's all based on the assessed valuation of homes in each of those townships. So they don't use the actual dollar values. They use, if you look over to the far left now, the average assessed value. They have these numbers that are in their formulas that make sense, to their tax assessor, don't necessarily make sense to you or I. We know that the average assessed value of homes in Sachem is roughly in the $325,000 to $350,000 range, roughly from community to community. So the estimated taxes are those center columns. So based on the numbers as we know them today, and I know I got a little bit wordy here, the average increase, if everything were to hold as we see it now, will be about $150 to $170, depending upon which community you live in. And again, this is on the school tax portion. You may also see increases in taxes from Suffolk County, town of Brookhaven, town of Islip, town of Smithtown, et cetera. This is just reiterating basically the slide that we looked at last time. It's just the highlights of the budget. The budget supports all staffing needs. We know that we're potentially in a precarious situation with a revenue stream. So we did pull back on some of the enhancements we had intended to put in the budget. We are still keeping those 2 E&L teachers that we spoke about last time. Dr. Morrow is still working on final staffing with guidance. So we'll get that ironed out soon enough. But we don't anticipate any changes that can't be accommodated within the constraints of the particular budget. Just a reiteration of some of the equipment that's currently in the budget for technology as well as athletics. There's also facilities equipment, et cetera, throughout the district. And then the last item down at the bottom is just a reminder of the various capital projects that'll be going on next year that are being paid for within the budget. So as many of you remember, Sachem long relied on bonded debt to do capital projects. They'd save up a whole bunch of work and then go out to the community and ask for a bond to be passed to pay for that work. Perfect way to do it. I mean, certainly you get economies of scale with doing things in bulk like that, but then you also have long-term debt on your books. And right now, I think Sachem does have still enough long-term debt on the books that I'd rather go in a pay-as-we-go model. And fortunately, we've been in a position over the last 4 years to build this into the budget. Next year, we're going to start doing some additional roofing work. We're going to start doing some bathroom work. We're doing some renovations at Sagamore. We're buying 6 new school buses again to round out the fleet. But again, at the bottom, there's that caveat. If we hear of additional state cuts, I'll come back to the board and then we'll come back to the community and we'll let you know what those modifications might be to the spending plan. Another important thing for this particular budget vote is we are utilizing the capital reserve that the voters approved us to establish last year. So the specific purpose for this was if at the end of a given year, you have sufficient funds left over, you can put them in this particular account. It's a portion of our fund balance, and it can only be used for necessary capital projects. And as you know, we've got a running list literally of hundreds of millions of dollars of deferred work and maintenance that needs to be done to the building. We need bathrooms everywhere. We still need additional roofing throughout the district, asphalt work, concrete work, you name it. So each year we're taking another bite at the apple, and we're just going to keep doing it, and we're going to be doing it within our means. So we're not going out and bonding more work. We're not having the community burden with long-term debt, interest payments, etc. So for next year, we're utilizing almost entirely the $6 million we placed in the reserve. And this will be something that's a second proposition on your ballot. So proposition number 1 will be the budget vote. Proposition number 2 will be a yes or no on this particular utilization of the reserve. And the important thing to know about utilizing the reserve is it does not impact the tax levy at all. So authorizing this $6 million in work, this is monies that are already set aside. There is no increase to the levy. There's no additional tax cost. We'll just be taking monies that are set aside from our fund balance, and we'll be using them for these specific projects, which primarily are the 2 turf fields at the high school, a running track at the high school, a running track at Sagamore, a retaining wall at High School East, and the other various items that you see there below. The other good thing about utilizing the reserve, and it's the same for a bond, the work still qualifies for building aid. So we're going to spend $6 million from this reserve, and once the work is done, we'll satisfy our paperwork with the state, and then over the next 15 years, we're going to receive back 76% of the work that was done. So we'll be getting $4.5 million roughly over time in the form of building aid, which then helps us keep putting money into the budget annually so that we don't have to get into that bond rut again. And I'll just jump to the next slide. I took a quick snapshot because it's a very different year. Everyone's used to either coming in the old-fashioned way, you drew the curtains and you flicked your levers, or in recent years, we've gone to electronic ballots where you fill in little bubbles. This year is a very different year. Every voter in the community that's a registered voter will be receiving a ballot. They should be hitting the mailboxes, I believe, by Thursday or Friday. The printing is all done and they are going out. I believe Ms. Florio took care of paying for the postage on Tuesday, so that's all set. But you're going to see the 2 propositions, and these are the exact propositions right here before you. So proposition 1 is voting on the budget for the $333 million. And proposition number 2, and it states right in the proposition, which has no financial impact on the voter, you're giving authorization for us to expend some of nearly $6 million from the reserve for the particular projects that are laid out here. And then just down below, I know it's a little hard to see, but there are 4 items on the ballot for you to consider. There is a front and a back side, so please look at both sides. You'll also see the candidates for the board election for our trustees for the Sachem School Board, and you'll also see the trustees for the library board. The library is not holding a vote this year. They're just doing trustee elections. So you'll have the opportunity to check off the boxes. There's an envelope that you'll place the ballot back in, and you'll send it back to the district. We must have it in hand by 5 p.m. on June 9th. So if you wait to that very last day, don't think that getting it postmarked counts. Postmark does not count on a ballot. The ballot physically needs to be in our hands. So on that last day, we will have the security vestibule at district office with a guard on hand to collect any ballots for somebody that does run up last minute. But at 5 o'clock, that window will close, and then we'll start the opening and counting process. And that basically wraps it up for the presentation. As I said, I tried to be as brief and simple as possible. The vote is on the 9th. That's the last day. It's by absentee ballot only. There is no voting at any of our buildings. With that, I'll stop sharing the screen, and we'll see if the board has any particular questions I can help answer. And if not, we'll just move on to the meeting.
Don, I just have a quick question.
Sure.
with those capital projects for using the capital reserves, the prices that you have next to them, are they estimates, or did you actually get contractors or companies to give you, proposals on that work?
Yeah, any work that you would do, whether it be for work within a budget, work for a bond campaign, or even work for utilization from the reserve, you're always utilizing your architect, who knows what current rates are and what costs are for various things to give you a best estimate. There is some room in those numbers, so we can't spend more than what's in there. So the voters approved the $5.99 million. If we only spend $5.5 million, we only spend $5.5 million. We can't spend 6.1. We can only spend up to the amount the voters approved. Now, if things start coming in over budget, we either have to modify the plan or scale back on some of the things and put them into a future proposition. But we can't go over. We're always using best estimates from our architects and engineers.
Okay, and that was my question, because I know in the past on some projects we've done in Sachem, since we have so many buildings and our buildings are older, sometimes you get into a project, just like any construction project, and you come up with some issues or problems when you're in the middle of a project, and it costs more money and it's more time. So if one of those projects goes over budget, I guess at that time you'll take some money away from other projects and reevaluate.
Correct. Like even in any given
fund
year,
balance, right?
You'll go out to bid on various things, or you'll utilize existing state contracts for certain things. So that once you get the approval from the state, you have to look at the numbers at that moment in time. If you bid something in the winter, the prices are different than if you bid it during the summer. But you can only start bidding the work once you have approval from the state to actually start on the project. So if there's something that had to be scaled back, we would scale it back. Like this year at Samoset, in the budget for the 2019-20 school year, our current school year, was the complete renovation of 5 science rooms and 3 life skills rooms. Some of those costs started coming in over budget, and I didn't want to scale back on the number of rooms, but I had the ability within the scope of the actual budget to buy the cabinetry and the furniture that we needed so we could go forward with the full-blown renovations and not cut back there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else?
Anyone else?
Okay, B, closing of the public hearing, motion.
Motion.
Sarah, second. Alex, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, section 3, visitors, suspension of public comment, motion. Larry, second. Bill, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. Section 4, business items, consent agenda A through D. May I please have a motion?
Motion.
Second.
Motion.
Motion, Sarah, second. Larry, sorry, my screen froze. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. So we now go to page 5. Personnel, consent agenda A through J. May I please have a motion? Alex, second. Bill? Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried, and I'll turn it over to Kristen.
Hey, good evening. On behalf of the Board of Education, the Superintendent, and the Cabinet, we would like to congratulate each of our 21 teachers that the board has approved for tenure for this upcoming school year. To say that we are elated at the staff and the teachers that we've been hiring and retaining over the last several years to make sure that we have the best teachers for our students is an underscore. We have really done a fabulous job at making sure that we are hiring some top-notch teachers who go above and beyond in the classrooms. Our principals see them in action, and our supervisors and directors each day, and the Cabinet has been in observing each and every one of them as well. Some of our teachers have been with us teaching in the past in other tenure areas or in other positions, and others who are up for tenure this year have been with us just a few short years. So we'd like to take a moment, and although we can't capture all the great things that they're doing on an individual basis, we'd like to make sure that you understand and recognize how important we believe that you are to the contribution of the education of our students, and to thank you and congratulate you. For those of you who are not aware who was awarded tenure this evening, I'll go through a brief listing of names and tenure areas, starting with Terry Bonacorso in speech, Jim Burns in technology, and special education. We have Lindsay Carucci, Judy Lynn Cincarelli, and Jackie Coop, and Mallory Danowski. In ENL, we have Lauren De Silva Horning. In special education, we have Peter Jensingler, Stephen Glazehagel, Dara Goss. In visually impaired, we have Diana Greenspan. We have in art, Nicole Healy. In speech, Diana Indrigo. In music, Brendan McGlone. In science, Greg McGrath. And in special education, Diana Petrelli, Lauren Pisani, Heather Porciolo. In speech, we have Nicole Richards, and Kate Sanderson Hoey is now in special education. We have science, which is Caitlin Thompson. And lastly, but certainly not least, in speech, we have Caitlin Trepicone. So we just want to thank you all for the tremendous work that you have done, continue to do, and congratulate you on your tenure.
Congratulations, everyone.
Congratulations, everyone. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Okay, we're on page 12, personnel.
Valerie,
Yes.
real fast, before we move on, a moment ago on 4B, we approved a couple of purchasing bid items. I just wanted to make a brief statement before we moved on.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. Although I have not been asked to do so, I've decided to make a brief statement before we move on to the rest of the agenda. I refuse to respond to any fake news or baseless claims of impropriety. If anybody wants to accuse myself or any other board member for that matter in the future, please provide proof along with ridiculous emails of social media posts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So personnel support staff consent agenda A through D. May I please have a motion? Alex, second. Bill, any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Was there a question? I'm sorry. No. Motion is carried. Page 17. Contracts, consent agenda A through J. May I please have a motion?
Motion.
Sarah, second. Larry, any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. Page 17, action items, consent agenda A through E. May I please have a motion? Alex, second. Larry, any questions? All in favor?
Or out of question.
Go ahead, Bill.
This was, A is the memorandum of agreement for the coaching stipends, is it not?
No.
No, there was a late change on that, Mr. Coggan. I'm sorry.
All right, I don't have that. I don't have that. So
Yeah, A is now F, and everything else moved up in the line.
A is now F. So A is F
No.
included in what we just voted on, or no?
No.
Okay,
That's
so
separate.
That's
gonna
fine.
be
So
separate.
I'm a yes then.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. So now we're on page 19, which is F, approval of the SCTA memorandum of agreement for the 2019-20 school year. May I please have a motion?
Motion.
Alex, a second. Jim Kiernan. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Larry? If you could just say your name if you're in favor.
Alex.
Thank you.
Jim
Larry.
Cannon.
Jim Kiernan, Larry. Any,
Jimmy M.
Jimmy and Caruso, are you in favor?
I think he's frozen. He said yes.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, that's 1, 2, 3, 4.
I said yes.
Okay, thank you. So that's 6. All opposed? Bill, Dorothy, Meredith. Motion is carried.
So Laura, I just wanted to make a comment on that.
Okay.
You know, as far as my opposing, I think as far as what it says, it was just it was a memorandum of agreement for the stipends for this year. And, you know, although I value our coaches, I just thought, you know, as far as this year, our high school season for spring sport ended a couple of days after it began. So the high school coaches really only coached for a couple of days. And I understand there were things they did before the season and other things that they might be doing virtually. But, you know, my thought was, as far as I thought, giving them 50% of their stipends for the whole season, since they, you know, only did it for about a week. I thought 50% was fair. I thought it was something we can do in good faith to show that we do value them. You know, I know other districts, and I didn't poll every single district, but I know some of us reached out to other districts, and most other districts were not paying the full stipends. You know, they were paying 10 or 20% or different percentages. So, and I don't know, I think, John, it came to what, 300,000 for the high school stipends for the coaches?
For the total pay, yeah.
The total pay was 300,000. So I thought 50% and 150,000 for the high school coaches. I thought that was fair since they didn't do the full season. I just don't think, my opinion is, I just don't think, you know, this is taxpayer money. I just don't think it was fair that we would use that money to pay for a full season. I thought 50% was good. And that, like I said, that's just my personal opinion. And that's why I'm not voting for that.
Okay, thank you.
President Slattery,
Yes.
just real fast. I think it's great that everyone has an opinion and a reason why, but I think the value of the coaches, the coaches do not get paid per practice or per game. It's not broken up like that. And I know that we've had this conversation before, but the amount of work that's put in the off season is incredible. Whether it be, you know, doing National Honor Society or doing anything volunteer-wise, doing any strength and conditioning program, doing any skill development program, doing any outside league or tournament to try to keep the kids playing all year long. We're paying not only the coaches here, but we're paying all of the club advisors as well. And, you know, if the reasoning is that we don't want to pay them because they didn't do the whole season, well, then 50% doesn't make any sense, because at that rate, you might as well just pay them for the 5 days that they worked. There is so much that goes into being a coach. And when you say we are Sachem, if the mindset becomes we're going to coach for 3 months a year, you're going to watch the athletic program as a whole suffer because of that mindset. We have coaches that work extremely hard. And coaching in another district, they make my life more difficult because the Sachem kids are always prepared. And I give the kids a tremendous amount of respect, but the coaches don't stop working either. And that's why I voted yes as well.
All right, thank you, Alex. Meredith?
Yeah, I just want to say that, yes, we have some of the most incredible coaches out there on the Sachem staff. And that is why I voted to pay them 50% for the 4 days of work. Because as Alex said, it wasn't just 4 days of work, it was 4 days of a season, but a lot of work goes into it. I felt like 50% was fair, being that it was cut short and, you know, not their fault. But we are working with taxpayer money here, and we do, you know, $150,000, especially going into a year like we are possibly going into. That could be a couple of people's annual salary instead of several people's stipend. And I just feel that while we do value our coaches, 50% was fair. No one else that gets these stipends did only a few days into their season or their reason for their stipend. So I just feel like to give them the full stipend, especially I have been reaching out to many neighboring districts, both big districts that have tons of money to throw around and little districts that are struggling. And I reached out to a lot, and I haven't found anybody yet that gave the full stipend for the spring season. Not saying there's none out there, but I just, in my search, haven't found any. So I felt comfortable voting no to that.
Thank you. Jim Kiernan.
Yeah, Chris, maybe you could help me out on this. I was under the impression that that memorandum of agreement was solely being voted on, so it didn't become a past practice from the union. I didn't think it had anything to do with paying the coaches or not. I thought that was already decided, that they were getting paid. So a no vote, as far as I could see, is that you're opening a door for, if the no votes won, then the memorandum of agreement that it can't be used as a past practice would be nullified. Is that correct?
I understood it to all be wrapped into one, Jim, that the determination to make the payment at the level that the board authorized was included, as well as a provision, of course, that you've identified, that by doing so, we don't set any kind of past practice or anything like that. So it's not a matter that could be utilized in any kind of future proceeding to suggest, God forbid, we have another event like this. Who the heck could have seen this coming? Whether it's an act of nature or a pandemic or anything else that causes a closure, the agreement that you have authorized does provide you the protections that you mentioned, which is to ensure that the exercise of your discretion in this regard can't be used against you in the future.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Bill.
Seeing as how we're going to relitigate this a little bit here tonight, again in public, I figured I should put my 2 cents in. As many of the other board members, I was more than in favor to pay 50%, which I know for a fact was more than generous for work that wasn't done. And there's no question that coaches work hard in and out of season, but this season barely started. I think we had 3 days in when we pulled the plug because of the coronavirus. So it wasn't a very difficult decision for me to say 50% would be more than fair. To pay 100%, I think we're being neglectful with handling the public finances. And I've been hard pressed to find one community member who thinks this is a sound decision. So I hope the community members remember that there were some of us who in fact did not just vote for this and approve the spending of this money. It was a decision that we argued about in private, and then we came out here and we cast our vote. But there were some of us who did not endorse giving the coaches 100% of their coaching stipend for 3 days worth of work that was done in season. But this is nonetheless where we are.
Right, thank you. Alex?
I don't disagree with Bill about being fiscally sound, but I think that there's a disconnect of board members who may not have ever coached and that don't understand that recruiting is a year-long, multi-year-long process. So if a college coach calls me in May, but I'm only getting paid from November to February in my sport, I don't not pick the phone up or answer an email. I continue to work for that child and that family. And I think it's not fair to go after just the coaches when other groups did not fulfill the duties of their work for their full stipend. And that's what we've also discussed more than once in different session.
Okay, Meredith?
It's not going after the coaches. We value the coaches very much, and that's why they got 50%, because we know that they did more than just 4 days worth of work. But if you look at every other stipend, most of those people who get a stipend have done 90% of the work, 80% of the work, 98% of the work. So if we were to go back to be fair in the way you're saying, then your coaches for what they are being paid for. So now there's plenty of out of season stuff that they do out of the goodness of their heart because they're amazing coaches, and that's why we love them so much. But if we have to look at what they've done, then we would have to give them 4 days worth of pay. And so we went and gave them 50% of their pay. Other people, advisors, and like the drama, they were a day away from their performance. So they literally were 98% of the way there. So they'd get 98%. So I think that to say we're going after the coaches, that's not a responsible thing to say. We value our coaches, but we also value our taxpayers' money. And I feel 50% was more than enough for for the 4 days of in season. Believe me, I wish every coach was able to get paid for every ounce of work that they do all year long, because I know personally my own children are coached by some pretty incredible coaches that even right now, completely out of season, wasn't even their season at all, they're still in touch with their kids and weekly Zoom meetings and workouts and things like that. So believe me, every coach really does go above and beyond, and we do appreciate that. But we can't give away taxpayer money like that.
Okay.
Laura?
Yes.
I
Alex.
and I don't care who goes after me, if anybody, I'm not trying to get the last word, but it was my recommendation that if it was the will of the board, that I was fine with doing that, with what Meredith and everybody else suggested. But then I asked that the administration opened up everybody and said, this club did this amount of work and that's the percentage that they get. And this club did that amount of work. Maybe drama did do 98%, but there are other advisors that did not. And my recommendation was just be fair across the board if that was the will of the board. So when I say go after the coaches, because you're going after one separate group and not going along with, well, as long as we break up everybody, then that's going after one group.
There is no other group that did less than 50%. So it's to do all that work to come out with something that wouldn't behoove the coaches is kind of silly, because there's no other group that did less than 50% of their
But it's
work.
less than 50% of what you're saying they did. Again, we don't, coaches don't get paid for tryouts, practices, and games. There's recruiting and off-season workouts, and that maybe a kid gets in trouble in school, and you know what? Another teacher goes to the coach sometimes before they go to administration. So, coaches deal with a lot all year round, and that's what went into my decision.
Okay, but we're not paying the middle school coaches, right, John?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
All
But
right.
so we're not paying the middle school coaches because their season didn't start.
But
I'm sure they did some stuff too, right?
Due respect, if you've coached, you know that the middle school coaches don't do off-season conditioning and strength and conditioning. You know they don't do outside leagues. You know they don't get involved in recruiting. So yes, in middle school and high school, if they wanted to coach at a high school level, we have plenty of high school jobs open year by year here at Sachem that they could apply for. But that's middle school and high school is not comparable. It had nothing to
No,
do.
I'm not saying they're comparable, Alex, but
You broke up.
All right, I'm going to move on to donations, consent agenda. Allison, you have everybody how they voted on that, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Consent agenda A through C, may I please have a motion? Alex, second. Larry, all in favor?
I
Motion is carried. Committee on Special Education, consent agenda A through B. May I please have a motion? Bill, second. Alex, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion is carried. Monthly reports on board committees. Does anybody have anything?
No, nothing new to report for the legislative, and we had our audit meeting that we talked about already.
Okay. So, board discussion items. Okay, who would like to start? Jim Kiernan?
Yeah, John, what I'm looking for is, this year's not even over yet. We're still struggling on graduation and how we're going to end this year. But what worries me a lot is how we're going to deal with next year. September is a wink of an eye, and September will be here. And I understand that the governor is all over the place. I understand the state ed isn't really being very helpful. But what I'm going to ask you for is, what's your plan to make the plan? I mean, we need to know, the people need to know, the board needs to know, what are we going to do when they say, okay, schools could open? What is it going to look like? Now, I know you don't have the answer now. I'm not trying to put you on the hot seat right now. I'm just trying to say we have to open that door. Those discussions are going to have to start taking place sooner than later.
Those discussions are taking place at the administrative level. They're taking place in the various superintendents groups.
Well, can we get updates on that, John?
As we go along. I have put things in the various Friday packets as we learn different things. The district has joined the BOCES stakeholder group. The cabinet will all be members. The district is forming our own stakeholder group so that we can bring back the information we learned from the BOCES group, as well as information that's fed down to us from the state, so we can bring everything together. Right now, we're getting data from all different sources. We're getting guidelines from the CDC. The picture that they're painting for us to reopen would be that, prior to every child and adult walking into a school building in the fall, we're going to have to find a way to take their temperature.
I saw some of those things.
I'm not sure that that's feasible. I don't know what that looks like. And if you're going to wait till they get to the school building, well, what about the children that rode the buses? And in the next breath that they're talking about, you need to do social distancing on a bus. So a bus holds 66 students. By their model, they're saying that only 13 or 14 can ride. What will that look like? Are we going into A days, B days? Is it A, B, C days? Are children going on alternating days? Are there split shifts? Those are all the different things that we're gonna have to flesh out, because we're also using the same pool of bus transporters. So it can't look very different in Sachem than it might look in another district, because we're gonna have to rely on the transportation abilities of whichever carrier we end up going with for next year. So all of that will have to be taken into consideration.
No, I understand that, John. I do. I understand the behemoth task it is to get this done. And and also another side of that too is that we have to be ready to pull the trigger on distance learning on a moment's notice. And we could have all the best plans in the world and open up in September, and then in October we'll go to distance learning. And we really have to fine tune that and be ready to go in a moment's notice. We can't wait until it happens. We have an excuse the last time because we didn't know it was going to happen. But we know now the possibility exists that on a moment's notice, we could be back on distance learning. So now it would be on us if we're not ready for that.
Yeah, and in distance learning each week, Ms. Hines provides an update with things that have been improved, changed. Certainly, we just learned a few days ago that our summer special education program, which will be very difficult to address the needs of those children, needs to be done completely virtually. So we've already started having conversations with the special education department, how we're going to change the current delivery of education, and that might even help us improve the model for Gen Ed as we move into the summer, with trying to get more actual live time with students on a regular basis. Parents and families are struggling greatly. It's not necessarily the scenario of years ago, maybe when we grew up, where dad went to work and mom was home and there was no expectations. Mom's working, dad's working, everyone's trying to work. We can't have a synchronous learning set up where at 9 o'clock each day you go into math class. That child might be getting carted to grandma's at that time, or not anywhere near a computer, or maybe mom and dad are using the only computer that they have in the house and the child can't be on the computer. So we keep taking the model that we have developed and keep developing it and tweaking it and working with our administrators and our teachers. I don't know if Ms. Hines has anything to add to that, but it's certainly not that we're not working on it. It's a work in progress.
Yeah, I mean, John, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Aaron, go.
I was just going to say, certainly the feedback from the community, yourselves included, is something that has, weighed on us in terms of the planning that we are moving forward. I just want to remind our community and our board that I had made the recommendation about 2 years ago now to Dr. Graham and the rest of our cabinet to start, only because we were sorely behind in terms of instructional technology. So we started Google Training and other virtual platforms in concert with working with our SCTA. And we also, as you know, over time have purchased quite a bit of devices that we have now loaned out to our students. So while yes, in increments of 2 weeks, which turned into 3 months, but at the end of the day, we are a very large school system, and we've been able to successfully ensure that every teacher at K-12 is on a virtual platform. That is no small feat for us. We have done a considerable amount of time that we have taken for professional development, even while all of our teachers are at home. And just today, I was talking with our SCTA members about, conjuring up a summer institute and moving forward with providing even in more depth professional development. We hear though loud and clear, and we know that we are going to need to step up our game in terms of more live teaching. And whether that's going to be fully synchronous, I don't know if we're going to quite get there at this moment, but we are going to work towards providing more opportunities for our students. And, as John had said, we are just awaiting, which will go out to our community tomorrow. We're waiting for anticipated guidance from Governor Cuomo, who's going to be working with NYSED in terms of what a reentry plan could look like. We've been very fortunate to have been included on the reentry planning team at BOCES. And we have discussed starting our own and putting out surveys to those stakeholder groups that will allow us to bring forth members from the community and from our own stakeholder groups within our district to start planning. We don't know what it will look like yet, but I do, to your point, Mr. Kiernan, know that I think it will be of great comfort for people to know that we're just opening up the doorway to having conversation.
Just the final note on this is that when I hear, waiting for the governor's guidance, the governor, he did what he had to do as far as health and safety of the state, but his guidance on schools was atrocious. I mean, every 2 weeks, we would just push back another 2 weeks, another 2 weeks. And if his plan to open schools is going to take that same road, well, I'm going to let you know how to open in September. 2 weeks from now, we'll look at it again. 2 weeks from now, we'll look at it again. We'll be in September. So I guess what I'm saying is that when you guys meet and you guys have these sessions, that on your own, come up with some plan A, B, and C, and don't particularly wait for the governor to come up with his plan.
Well,
I think a bit more in terms of the orders, and I absolutely agree with you, right? That's what we're looking to do, and not just in distance learning, in all areas, as John had said, is just coming up with various plans and working with other districts to see what everybody is looking to do. But in terms of orders, I mean, what we're not allowed to do. So if we have to have a plan A for distance learning, whether or not we're coming back full time, whether we're coming back in terms of a mix, whether we are having to do just going back to, some sort of like a split session, that's what I mean. But yes, you're right. It doesn't really change the fact that no matter what, distance learning will probably always be in this new world of education. So, we're going to provide training and step up our game with that no matter what.
So, Erin, if we don't have, we're not going to use live teaching because we don't know who has a device or when they're available to have a device. But what if we did live teaching and then had it recorded? So when those students have access to the device, they can do the work, watch the video on their time. But the students that do have access don't miss out on live teaching.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean. If they don't have a device taping it?
Having the lesson taped, but for live teaching, but the students that can attend those sessions that do have devices can attend the live.
Well, I think our plan is to start working towards, and I believe Mr. O'Keefe had talked about this last time. We have some flexibility now in terms of our title grants, which in the past we have not been allowed to purchase large quantities of technology, and now we're allowed to. So, between he and I and the rest of cabinet, we're looking at finances and how we can start purchasing more quantities of devices. Mr. Renda is working on that right now. The block for us is that we're not the only school district purchasing devices. There's various school districts that are doing that. So a part of our upgrade to the plan is just making sure what students don't have something so that we can get that into the hands of those students. But, right now we'll still continue to work on everything from Google Classroom where everything is posted, and whether that's a video that a teacher has taped or what have you. But we will start to upgrade increments of virtual live learning for the students as we move forward.
Yeah,
And I
just
think we have-
having everyone have a Google Classroom would be positive, because everything posted on either so many different websites, IXL, you have Edpuzzle, it's just jumping from navigating from one platform to the next. It's very
And I would
difficult
say
for
that our
some
teachers,
students.
I would say that our teachers feel the same. They're trying to use various ways to engage the students, and they're working very hard to make sure that the students have various ways to access and to keep focused. I mean, we all know this has been a long road, my own children included. By this time, everyone's tired, they're over it, and they just want to start moving on. But to Mr. Kiernan's point, we have to come back. So those are the talks that we are having at the cabinet level, and we'll be opening up to a stakeholder team soon in the future.
Dorothy.
Quick. So I just have, John, I know I had sent you an email about this, but as far as the Smart Schools bond, because, Jim Kiernan's point is the point that I was going to bring up as well. I really think that we should be proactive in what we're doing as far as what we're planning for the fall. In talking to most parents, and I'm sure you're getting this too, and the teachers, they want those kids back in the classroom, and the teachers want to be able to teach. And, it's not just, it's for the educational and the academic part of it, but it's also for the mental, the social interaction. And obviously we have this pandemic, and we might not have a vaccine by then, which we will not probably, but I hear all these different ideas of how we can actually get the kids into the buildings and get the staff in the buildings. But if we're dealing with some of the Smart Schools bond, as far as that was supposed to be for technology, number one, that's my first question. Where are we with that? Because we need more technology. Even if we're going to do split sessions, or we're going to do some virtual, some in school, it's not working. This virtual distance learning for the students it's not working. The teachers had no time to prepare, the staff had no time to prepare, and the students and the parents had no time that for the fall. But my first question is the Smart Schools bond, and the second question is, as far as the governor, is he asking for suggestions now?
No.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, I'll let John answer
about now?
that. And we have
Yeah.
Jim Kiernan and then Alex.
Yeah, the governor's definitely not asking anyone for any suggestions.
Can you hear me now?
You're cutting in and out, but smart school wise,
Okay.
as I detailed in a couple of different memos to the board, the first phase of smart schools bonds, in total, the district had an allocation of $11 million. This was money that the state actually went out and bonded for to provide to the district after we did certain things within the constraints of their plan. So we had to submit a plan. It took a very long period of time for it to get approved. Once it was approved, we jumped on it out this time last year. First phase of the plan was the security vestibules. Those vestibules were completed, somewhere into the beginning of this current school year. Then we went through the closeout project with the paperwork, filed for our reimbursement. And I believe in early April, I let the board know when we finally received the check back for the monies that we laid out for those vestibules. The second phase of smart school spending is upgrades to our security camera system, which are all old analog cameras that don't necessarily record what and where they need to record. And the bigger component of phase two was actually installing wireless throughout the district, because we're probably one of very few school districts on Long Island that does not have a wireless network. When the current cabinet joined the school district just a short time ago, 4 years or so ago, there was really nothing in the district wireless wise. There might have been a few hundred computers, but they were old clunky desktops in the back corner of each classroom. We have added probably now in excess of 4,000 machines, all of them portable, whether they be in carts, whether they be iPads, whether they be Chromebooks, whether they be laptops or tablets, depending upon the need or the grade of the student. We're still not a one-to-one. We would need over 12,000 devices, but we've gone a heck of a long way from where we were a few years ago. So The kickoff meeting for that project, which is about $8 million, literally took place 10 o'clock or so this morning. We were on the phone for another WebEx meeting for about an hour, hour and a half with the architect, the engineer, the firm that'll be doing the installation, our maintenance guys, our security guys, our facilities guys, all the different stakeholders throughout Sachem, the clericals in the business office that'll be handling the paperwork, etc. All the different people that'll be involved. We know the timeline start to finish for this phase is probably over a year because it would be a matter of wiring every single building in the district for wireless, then running all new cabling, because right now all of our cameras run on coaxial cables, so they'll all be running on Ethernet cable, and then installing the new servers and getting the whole system set up. So we could hope for about 12 months. We could hope for the start of school in 2022. If things don't go well, it might be 18 months, but we're still well over a year away. And along the way, because remember, we're laying this money out. This money, the $8 million is not sitting in the budget somewhere. We're taking this money from our cash flow, spending it, filing paperwork, and then waiting for the state to return it. So it's also a careful dance of not overextending ourselves and spending too much and be left hanging for a bill that we need to pay, but we don't have that money back from the state to pay that bill. So we're going to be aggressive about moving forward as quickly as possible, but also cautious in how we do the work so that we can maximize the return from the state as quickly as possible. So I hope that answered it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Jim Kiernan.
Erin?
Yes.
Did I hear you correctly before you said that you're currently discussing with the SCTA possible staff development over the summer?
Yes, actually, and I don't, this has been like an ongoing effort in terms of the SCTA, which, we have shared before. Once we knew that we were going to start moving towards, distance learning, we've been meeting weekly to just ensure that professional development resources, et cetera, were had. And just, fine tune it as we went along, as you said, in those 2-week increments. Now that we know, we're starting to have real concentrated talks about what that will look like. And actually the SCTA cabinet sent out a survey to their own members, which really helped us in terms of, we gave a lot of instructional technology training over the past 2 years, but what is it now that they really need? So Nearpod, Seesaw, all of those different items that we know that, especially on the elementary level, they're utilizing for the students. We just want to make sure that everybody really truly feels comfortable with it now. So again, we're going to start offering that over the summertime and work that out, which we've done summer institutes in the past. And now it could be more robust because everybody can do that right from the comfort of their home on Zoom. We are currently doing that with our model schools people as well, but this will be more of a concerted effort, and just also making sure that all of our teachers have working technology themselves at home.
Thank you.
Alex.
Mrs. Hines, do you know, I know that everyone who needed a computer got one. You guys worked so hard to get that done.
Mhm.
But if there's, let's say, 2 or 3 children in the same household, were you working on making sure there was at least one device in each house?
That's actually what we did. And this is in concert with Mr. Rendo's office. And thank you. I can't remember who said it. That again was no small feat, making sure. But each week we would send out surveys, questionnaires out to our families. And we believe at this point, we feel comfortable that any of the families that had no technology in their home did or were given the opportunity to receive one device. And we had multiple opportunities for families to come in and pick those up. We actually had some families that said, you know what, we really appreciate it, but we were able to find one or we purchased one ourselves. So we, for the most part, have been able to help every single family. That's not to say that we still don't have some families that are wishing for a second or a third. And we do still have a Google form for any of those students where if somebody was to return it or we were to able to purchase it, then we would be, starting that second round of helping folks out in their homes.
Do you know about how many devices that we gave out?
Well over 600, it's like 550, 600 at this point.
And if you don't know this, it's okay, but about how many devices would we need to purchase to ensure that every student has one in their hands?
Well, that's well into the thousands, as you know. So I can't speak to that. I would have to look at the survey, but I think we had shared with you, I'd shared with you in our board weekly on Friday, that is one of our goals, is to start working toward a one-to-one initiative, not certainly for all of our students at once. Mr. O'Keefe and I and the rest of the cabinet, we would look at our title grant funds and whatever else he was able to bring forth in our general funds and start seeing how we can address it. Probably looking at the secondary schools first, and any of our staff members that also needed devices. Obviously, both sides need to be able to work together.
Yeah. So one of my issues is I know that we've talked about live videos before, but if there are households with 2, 3, 4 students, and 2 or 3 teachers went on live at the same time, and there was only one device in that house, you could see how that is right now an issue.
Yes.
I applaud the entire cabinet, all the administration, the teachers, again, and Jim said this, and so did Dorothy. No one expected any of this. This is far from perfect and far from what we would want. But I know that everybody is working extremely hard. And I also know that plans moving forward are also being worked on. So I would hope that that's litigated in here, and questions are to you other than social media. But I applaud your efforts and the entire cabinet.
Thank you. And I think just to cap it out, unless anybody else has any questions, I think the greatest thought that we can bring away from this is that everybody, SCTA, SAA, cabinet, board members, we're all on the same page about this, but there are a lot of variables to ensuring that every student is able to have, the Cadillac version, as we like to say, of what we're looking to do, but we are working towards that. And that is our goal, obviously, at the end of the day.
Ms. Hines, I just have a question. So if parents are struggling with their students because their teachers aren't as connected, or their students feel like they're not connected, so they're not getting the instruction that you're describing here, or that other people who have had very positive experiences are getting, should they email first the teacher, then the building principal? Like, what do parents do whose children are struggling and who are really having a difficult time with this?
Yes, and I appreciate you sharing that, because we all do get quite a bit of emails, and we work our best the way down to answer everybody. But 9 times out of 10, I find myself answering emails and asking first, have you spoken to the teacher? Have you spoken to the principal? Because they're really the first line of defense. And just like the district memo that we send out each year, just now it's virtually, if you're having a difficult time and a teacher is not able to get back to you for some reason, again, they're working with many students themselves. We also had an issue at one point of some of our emails being blocked because of our own server, which Mr. Renda has fixed for us. But I would say, if there's any issue, if you're feeling like, you just need some extra support, talk to the teacher. If you don't get an answer there, or you don't feel comfortable with the answer, then you would go to the principal. And then if not there, then you would come to me next.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Bill?
I'm not sure if John or Erin or anyone has the answers about this, but I'm just curious. In the beginning of the coronavirus, COVID-19, we were getting reports from the Suffolk County Health Department about families in our community having COVID, and bus drivers and so on and so forth. To date, do we have any data on how many students contracted COVID-19?
Yeah, pretty soon into that, they stopped. Once it started rolling and snowballing, we stopped getting regular updates.
Right, I remember that being the case. So I didn't know maybe if there'd been anything else that had reached us. So we don't know.
No, I mean, we have people that self-report to us. We have staff members. We have the spouses of staff members, other people within a household of staff members. Obviously people are concerned, people are scared. So I don't think anyone's trying to hide the information. There's no shaming involved here. The people have come forward and told us. I haven't really heard, too much from the student side, I guess, because school was basically closed. I guess parents didn't feel the need necessarily to disclose to us, but on the employee side, we got regular updates from our own staff.
So how many staff have reported that they've contracted it?
I don't have an exact number for you. I'd have to go back and look. But
Yeah.
there's quite a number. I mean, not necessarily actual staff members, more family within the household. You know, the spouse got it and the spouse employee decided, you know, I need to quarantine for 14 days to play it safe, that type of stuff.
Right. So we're working without any hard data whatsoever.
Yeah.
As our state government is working without any hard data.
Yeah, that'll be the challenge, you know, again, to Mr. Kiernan's point with reopening, that, you know, part of the CDC guidelines is we need the data on every single one of those people. And I'm not even sure, you know, from the legal HIPAA standpoints, how much we're entitled to.
Right. I just think, you know, we're going to be hard pressed to put together any kind of an effective program to bring students back in the building and guarantee that no one contracts this thing. But I do think it's worthwhile for everybody to consider, because in my conversations with people, it seems to me that many are not considering who's getting this disease, how sick are they getting, how deadly is this to the general population. I've experienced a few deaths of people that I know myself, a number of people who've gotten the illness, but I can tell you, outside of one of my own students who had a very mild case of this, I don't know any young people who've contracted it. And yet we've got the entire school system shut down. And what I can tell you is that this distance learning does not work. And for the benefit of anyone who happens to be watching this tonight, who doesn't know me, you should know that I'm a teacher in another district. And I can tell you that I've really put my heart and soul into doing distance learning and doing it as best I possibly can. It is a one-to-one school, so every child has a device, every child has internet. We don't have the problems that we have here in Sachem necessarily in delivering the instruction. But I can tell you that even though I get online every day and I meet live with students, and on the days that I don't see them live, there's a lesson waiting for them, and there's emails back and forth and all of the things that we'd want, that this is grossly inferior to having children directly under your supervision. And I work with a population that is largely high achieving students that are self-motivated, and in many cases going to some of the best universities ultimately in this country. And for them, it's been a difficult ride, and it's done a lot of damage to them. So when you consider that many of the students that sit in our classrooms are a hostile audience at best, who need to constantly be guided back in and brought back on task, this system does not work. We are failing our children, and we're either going to make a decision to fail our children, or we're going to find a way to bring them back as safely as possible and mitigate the spread of this disease. Because other than that, we're just whistling past the graveyard. The devastation to them in terms of their educational career and the outcomes for them will last for years and years to come. I see it here in my own household with my child who still attends Sachem schools. It's not necessarily the fault, I would say, of the individual teachers that she has, but I would say that she has not received the education that I want her to receive. And she has the technology, it's accessible to her, but people are not delivering the kind of instruction that she needs. And it's not their fault necessarily, but it's the fault of what we're dealing with. So we need to keep that in mind when we think about the future. And we look to the governor for guidance here. Everybody says, we need guidance, we need guidance. And Jim Kiernan has it exactly correct. We will not get guidance because no one knows what is going on here. So we need to sort of step up, figure out our own plan. We need to be bold. We need to be prepared to upset some people and not tell them what they want to hear. And we need to give people options. But those options need to consider what ultimately will be best for our children. And as I said just a moment ago, everyone will not be happy when we're bold and make decisions that might be helpful. But let's not be fearful either, because all I see is people operating out of 100% fear right now, without any consideration to what the reality actually is, the way that this is hurting real people, who it's hurting, and where our children fall in the spectrum of who's actually being hurt. They seem to not be being hurt much by the actual COVID-19 virus. It's a much older population that is being hurt.
So Laura, I just have one
Thank
more
you, Bill.
question.
Alex was first, Dorothy, and then you can go.
Dorothy,
Thank-
go ahead, please. I'm good.
It was just a a follow-up question that I had asked John before. So if we come up with the plan, which I think we should be proactive here and come up with some type of plan, if we come up with a plan as far as how we can work it out to put kids back in the building, where there's a balance of some type of social distancing, or whether it's split sessions, or, you know, if we don't do food in the cafeteria, or how we work it out as far as passing in the hallways, not sharing supplies on the elementary school level, whatever we do, and we come up with different plans, even if we have those plans and we say, okay, we've kind of figured this out, it's really up to the governor, right? To say, okay, you can use that plan, or you're not using that plan at all. And
Yeah, we already know that in June, they're going to release their required guidance, the non-negotiables that we'll have to follow. And we also know that sometime in July, they're going to open up an online portal where we're going to have to file our plan, which will need to be approved. So as Mr. Kieran said, it's coming fast.
yeah.
So literally, we're going to be closing down schools.
And John, you're talking to other districts, right?
We talk regularly, almost daily. Superintendents groups are meeting regularly at county level, island-wide level, cluster level for the individual towns. So we're all talking, we're all hearing what the other one is hearing in case somebody missed something. So it's going to come on rather quickly.
So John, what about other areas of the country that have already said that they're going back to school in the fall or in August, and they already have plans to go back? Have you looked at any of those types of plans?
We've seen plans from other states, but they've also we've been told to look at them with great caution because they're not designed to meet some of the requirements of the various executive orders that we're under. So there might be some interesting concepts in there that might be worth a look.
Right.
But the finer details need to align to all the executive orders from the state.
Okay. Alex?
John, would it be worthwhile to put a committee together as far as admin, SCTA members, board members, community members, to maybe discuss possibilities or options that we have?
You're talking about for reopening?
Yes.
Yeah, that Ms. Hines went through that stakeholders will be sending out surveys. We can't have an unlimited number of members.
Well, I meant
cross-section.
like Zoom, similar to like a Zoom meeting.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Does anybody have any future agenda items? Okay, our next meeting is, when is our next meeting?
June
June
17th, I believe.
Okay, I just don't see it.
Are we doing one on June 9th or 10th?
June 9th, right?
June 9th will be the
9th.
opening of the ballots.
Right.
And that the opening, we'll still have to work that out, will be screened. I guess depending upon the
this
quantity
says
of ballots will
June
determine
17th.
whether or
I'm
not
sorry.
we
I
have a
missed
final
that.
count that evening.
Right,
I'm hoping so.
right. So this has our next regular Board of Ed meeting, June 17th at 7:30.
Right. Yeah, we'll have to look to see if the board is looking to convene the night of the actual budget vote to accept the results of the vote.
Okay.
Laura, you muted yourself.
Thank you, Alex.
No problem.
Okay, so that would be a discussion among the board if we want to meet on June 9th for the results to accept them. So for now, we'll do a motion to go into executive session for the discussion of collective negotiations, the employment of a particular personnel, and legal advice regarding potential litigation. May I please have a motion? Alex, second Meredith. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.